welcome back to Infamous Indie. And if this is your first time joining us, I'm your host, That Dead Girl. And basically, what we do here is I sit down and share with you a true crime story from my home state of Indiana. So, again, I'm filming in a different spot in my house. I'm actually back in my bedroom, but I've been thinking about changing my background up a little bit, and I actually did order a few things. So for now, I'm just going to film like this until I get all my new goodies. And then I'm going to be updating my background, and hopefully that will be a more permanent spot for me to do these videos. So last week we finally got to the conclusion of the Shanda Sharer story, and this week I wanted to share with everyone the story of Heather Norris. Heather Norris was a beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead of her, but sadly that would all change when she began dating a boy named Joshua Bean. Heather and Joshua would go on to have a very tumultuous on again, off again relationship. A relationship where Heather would suffer physical and emotional abuse at the hands of Joshua. And sadly, Heather would eventually lose her life. I felt it was very important to, share Heather's story because I myself have been in, relationships that were very abusive in the past, and I know a lot of other people that I know have as well, and I think it's just an important story to share and bring awareness about the issue of domestic violence. Heather's story is, a sad story. There's no easy way to put it, but it is a story that I feel definitely needs to be shared. Heather Nicole Anslet Norris was born in 1987 in Indianapolis, Indiana, to parents Deborah Norris and Edwin Lancet. Heather was very loved by everyone who knew her, and she said numerous times that she felt as though she was put on this earth to help other people. From an early age, Heather was said to be very outgoing and very active. Heather displayed a true passion for anything involving sports, teamwork, or competition. Heather was also an avid animal lover, and over the years she collected and cared for many different types of pets, but she especially loved cats. Heather participated in numerous sports, including varsity volleyball and basketball. Although Heather played many different sports, her true passion in life was basketball. She would even end up going on to play for the traveling AAU teams. Heather attended Perry Meridian High School and was said to have many friends and a very active social life. Heather would graduate from Perry Meridian in 2005, and from there she would end up attending school at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. When Heather was just 18 years old, she would fall head over heels in love with a boy 3 years her senior, and that boy's name was Joshua Bean. The two started out as friends, but would quickly go on to become a couple. Now, right from the jump, many of Heather's friends and families got a negative vibe, when it came to Joshua. It's said that Joshua never came to Heather's house to pick her up for dates or even come inside to meet her parents as other boys had done in the past. Not many of Heather's friends knew Joshua, but the ones who did expressed that they felt very uncomfortable around him. Just a few months into the relationship, Heather confided in her mother, Debbie, that she had been abused by Joshua. She told Debbie that whenever she and Joshua would get into an argument and things would escalate, Joshua would, quote, lose control. And Heather would go on to tell her mother not to worry, that, she had the situation under control. So Debbie trusted what her daughter said, but still keeping in the back of her mind that this was going on. By the time Heather had gone off to college at Indiana University, Joshua was already attending school at IUPUI. Heather was very excited and, just really looking forward to her college experience. She was even all set up and ready to share a dorm room with her cousin. And during this time in Heather and Joshua's relationship, Joshua really started to show, his true colors. So Heather, being a freshman in college, she actually doesn't have a car at this time. So this started to put a little bit of strain on, Heather and Joshua's relationship. Because basically that meant if Joshua wanted to see Heather or spend time with her, he had to drive, to her school in Bloomington and hang out with her at her dorm. It's said that Joshua really didn't like this at all, but he began making the trips every weekend to Bloomington to pick Heather up anyway. He would just go on to complain that, it was a really long drive. He was a busy guy, and he really just did not like Heather's stuck up college friends. So the weekend trips continued on, but eventually it came to a point where Joshua began to refuse to take Heather back to school. And he would always seem to have, some sort of excuse. I have class. I have to work. I'm too busy. I just don't want you to leave. Heather would then have to call her parents and ask for a ride back to school. And, this was uncomfortable for Heather because her parents did not approve of her and Joshua's relationship. And this would go on for quite some time. He would come to pick her up, she would go with him, and then he would refuse to take her back. And eventually, her grades began to suffer. Her schoolwork was just really affected by all of the classes that she was missing. She was missing so many classes, and this was just very unlike Heather. She would eventually end up withdrawing from school altogether. And as time went on, people were seeing and hearing less and less of Heather. Heather's friends and family had been calling her to, just communicate or hang out. She began to make up excuses as to why she couldn't go or just ignored their calls completely. The few people who did remain in contact with Heather said that during this time she became very sick from all of the emotional stress put on her by her relationship with Joshua. She began to lose weight and stopped caring about her appearance. It's also said that she was struggling, a lot with depression during this time. And, I could imagine so. Essentially, what Joshua was doing was isolating Heather. He was slowly cutting all of her ties to anyone in the outside world. He began to take control of every aspect of her life. And this on again, off again cycle would just continue on for quite some time. Heather would disappear with Joshua for days or weeks at a time. And, then she would leave Joshua and she would come back home. And during the times when she did come back home, it said that she started to appear like her old self again. Her laughter returned. She was eating again. She started caring about her appearance. She was even being social. Heather may have been able to, hide the bruises or whatever from the abuse she was enduring, but she could not hide from her friends and family the way that her demeanor changed and the effect, that the abuse was having on her. After the last really bad fight Heather had with Joshua, which actually resulted in her getting a concussion, she told her parents that it was over between her and Joshua for good. She had had enough at this point and she really just, wanted her life back. Heather took a lot of steps, including that, first step, the most important one, which was to leave Joshua and cut all ties with him. Heather even enrolled in a local university and she ended up finding a job that she actually really loved. But unfortunately, it would just end up becoming one of many jobs that Heather would have to quit because of Joshua. No matter what happened, Heather would always go back to Joshua. Heather was smart, Heather knew right from wrong. So a lot of people may be asking themselves right now, if it was so bad, why did she keep going back? Some say it was just because Heather loved Joshua. I mean, others say that she thought that she could really help him or change him. Heather herself even told everyone, that she had the situation under control. She knew what she was doing. But sadly, she was wrong. Heather had entered this relationship, at 18 years old. And by this point, she had been enduring Joshua's abuse for 3 years. This was Heather's first real relationship. And at the age of 20, it would end up being her last. And just to give you some sort of idea as to how tumultuous this relationship actually was, I definitely want to share with you basically the timeline of abuse. Now, these are all either eyewitness accounts or incidents where Heather had actually pressed charges against Joshua. So first we'll start off with the story of what happened during Heather's Thanksgiving break in 2005. So it's 2005, it's Thanksgiving break. Heather and her friend Erin are actually home from school for the holiday. Now, at some point during this break, Heather actually calls Erin crying hysterically. Erin immediately left and went to meet up with Heather, arriving about 10 minutes after the call was initially made. When Heather was finally calmed down enough, she began to tell Erin everything that had happened. She had been visiting with Joshua and his father at Joshua's father's house, and the two had gotten into an argument. Things had escalated like really quickly, and somehow Joshua ended up punching Heather in the stomach and placing her in a headlock. Now, at this point, Erin actually noticed that Heather's eye had been scratched, and she had what appeared to be red fingerprints or handprints around her neck. Heather would go on to tell Erin that Joshua's father actually intervened, in the situation and got Joshua off of her, and that he had actually called police. And Heather and Joshua would go on to break up after this incident in November 2005. So the couple breaks up and some time passes, and on Valentine's Day in 2006, Joshua actually shows up to Heather's dorm room with flowers. And you guessed it, the couple would go on to reconcile and they got back together. Now, this is during the time where Heather began to spend more and more time with Joshua in Indianapolis, and also during the time where she withdrew from college. The next incident that I wanted to bring up happened in November of 2006. A woman named Hazel Rich, I hope I'm saying the last name right. But anyway, a woman named Hazel Rich came home to find Heather, whom she didn't know, sitting on her front porch. And her home was located on South Meridian Street in Indianapolis. Hazel noted that Heather's arms and hands were bleeding and badly scraped up, and also that she was crying and very distraught. Heather would go on to tell Hazel that her boyfriend Joshua had thrown her and her belongings out of a moving vehicle. Heather asked Hazel if she could use a phone, and Hazel would end up giving her a phone so that Heather could call her mother Debbie to come and pick her up. Heather and Joshua would then break up again in November of 2006. So those are just a couple of, incidents where there were eyewitnesses, and I did also want to bring up Heather would press charges against Joshua in August of 2006 alleging domestic battery. Heather would go on to press charges for a second time against Joshua in December of 2006, alleging domestic battery and invasion of privacy. And like I mentioned before, do keep in mind that these are just incidents where there was an eyewitness or, police were involved. The extent and frequency of abuse that Heather experienced is essentially unknown. But I definitely felt that it was important just to share with you these few things, because there definitely was a long sort of history of violence between these two. And to me, what that tells me is that Joshua Bean is a very, violent man. So now we're going to jump forward a bit to April of 2007. Heather had stopped returning and answering phone calls from friends and family, just completely. No one had seen or heard from her. And during this time, Heather's mother, Debbie, would actually end up finding out that Heather's phone had been turned off completely. All of this was just very unlike Heather, and Debbie really began to worry. Heather's parents began calling everyone Heather would know. They even began searching for her at homes of people she knew, and places that she was known to hang out at, but they were unable to locate her. Heather's father, Edwin, would actually end up going to Joshua Bean's house and knocking on the door, but no one appeared to be home and no one answered. Heather's parents would end up filing a missing persons report on April 25th, 2007. And in the beginning of this investigation, police didn't have a whole lot to go off of. So the first place that they started to look was Heather's social media, and at this time, it was actually her MySpace account. So upon checking Heather's MySpace account, they were actually able to find the last message that Heather had sent. The message simply read, "I can't take this anymore. I really need to get out of this state. Police would also go on to find a very cryptic post made by Heather on her MySpace page as well. And the post actually reads, "Drama box checked. Current mood, sad. No one believes me. No one understands me. You know who you are. I can't take this drama anymore. I need to get out of this state." As I mentioned earlier, Heather was very close to her friends and family. So not only did this post strike them as odd, it was just very unlike Heather. Even if Heather were, to leave the state as the post suggests, she would have told someone. Heather's family communicates with police about their findings on Heather's MySpace page. Heather's family believes and actually does tell police that any drama, coming from Heather's life would be caused by her boyfriend Joshua Bean. They also suspected that Joshua may have had something to do with Heather's disappearance. Now, while all of this is going on back in Indianapolis, Joshua Bean is actually on vacation with his friend David Dawson in Mexico. And at some point during this trip with, his friend David in Mexico, Joshua Bean would go on to confess. He confided in David that he and Heather had gotten into an argument and that Heather had actually come at him with a steak knife. He claimed that he and Heather got into a struggle over the knife and he had accidentally slit her throat. But, he swears to David that it was all purely in self-defense. He then goes on to tell David that he burned Heather's body and then dismembered her with a chainsaw. He then put Heather's remains into several different trash bags and then proceeded to dump them at several different locations throughout the south side of Indianapolis. So I definitely think that this is a good stopping point for part 1 of this story. I really just wanted to paint a picture for you of Heather's life and also show that timeline of abuse because it is important to the story. It definitely just goes to show how volatile and violent Joshua Bean actually was. So definitely in part 2, we are going to find out what happens to Joshua Bean and, what happens in the aftermath of Heather Norris's death. And as always, thank you for watching. Really means a lot to me. I know I say that every week, but it actually really does mean a lot to me to have people watch. I definitely have some new content coming out soon for you guys. As I said, part 2 of the Heather Norris story. I'm actually working on my next missing persons profile, and that's going to be about Corinna McClurkin. Still haven't picked a location for the next indie haunts, but I will be getting into that this week at some point. So be looking for all of those sometime this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, stay spooky, keep it creepy, and watch your back out there because it's a crazy fucking world.